welcome, as always, to everyone tuning in tonight on Zoom and on Facebook. I'm very glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host, Libby Davies, for tonight's Off the Hill political panel. I am joining you tonight from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people.
Well, hello, Robin, and to all of our guests and viewers who are joining us tonight, hello to you too. I live on the unceded traditional and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish Coast Salish peoples.
Tonight, we are joined by Sheila Regehr. Sheila is a founding member and current co-chairperson for the Basic Income Canada Network. She has nearly 30 years of federal public service work under her belt, spanning from frontline work to policy analysis and development. She's also the former executive director of the National Council of Welfare. Welcome, Sheila. And we welcome a special guest, Senator Kim Pate. Welcome, Kim. Senator Pate was appointed to the Senate of Canada on November 10th, 2016. She is an advocate for a basic income in Canada and has been active in building coalitions across the country with equality-seeking women's, anti-racism, anti-poverty, and human rights groups and organizations. Welcome, Kim. We also welcome back Leah Gazan. Leah is the MP for Winnipeg Centre and the NDP critic for children, families, and social development, women and gender, equality, and deputy critic for housing. And of course, welcome back to Karl Nerenberg, Rabble's senior parliamentary correspondent. Welcome also to everyone who registered for this event. Please participate in the chat or ask questions to our panelists through the Q&A function, and we will do our best, as always, to address your questions. And for those watching on Facebook, welcome. All right, today on Off the Hill, we are delighted to shine a spotlight on the issue of a guaranteed livable basic income and the national movement and network that has energetically engaged across the country for the establishment of a guaranteed basic income. We've talked about the need for this on many Off the Hill panels, particularly in relation to the global pandemic and growing income security and inequality in Canada. And in fact, many of you have raised the issue in your questions in previous panels. So it's time to dive a little deeper in and find out what it's all about.
Okay, well, thanks, Robin. And to get us going, we're going to start with you, Leah. Your motion M46, introduced in Parliament in 2020, and more recently, your private members bill C223, introduced in December of last year, proposes a national framework for a guaranteed livable basic income. So let's start with this. What compelled you to introduce and work on these two initiatives, Leah?
Well, first, before we get started, I just want to apologize. I'm going to have to be voting during the panel. So I want to apologize before I begin if
Understood.
I have to cut out
No
life in Ottawa. Look, it's no secret that there's growing inequality in this country. I represent the third poorest riding in Canada. And I've often said on many panels before, Rabble panels before, one of the most vile human rights violations is having people live in poverty when there's actual solutions to address it on the ground, particularly when you look at populations that have higher rates of poverty, including Indigenous peoples that have the highest rates of poverty in Canada, in fact. A direct result of colonization, a direct result of violent and genocidal land dispossession that left us homeless on our very own lands and poor, often in urban centers. The National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, even in their calls to justice, Call to Justice 4.5, point to a guaranteed livable basic income as a call to justice, as a way to ameliorate the violence, that the heightened levels of violence against Indigenous women and girls and diverse gendered people. And I know my work in the Status of Women Committee, something that came up over and over and over and over again as a way to protect women from violence, is to implement a guaranteed livable basic income. Now, this is not a silver bullet. The bill that I put forward, and Kim will speak to this as well. Senator Kim Pate has put forward the exact same bill on the Senate side, is in addition to current and future government programs and support. We have income guarantees in this country. EI is an example of an income guarantee, not livable. Social assistance, another example of an income guarantee, again, not livable. GIS, another example of an income guarantee, again, not livable. All my bill proposes, and Kim's bill proposes, is to make current income guarantees livable and to expand them out for those following through the cracks, including 70% of adults with intellectual disabilities who live in poverty, people with complex mental health and trauma that may be able to work 2-3 days a week, but can't hold down a 5-day, 40-hour-a-week job. You know, this is a charter issue. There is no excuse with this government giving billions in bailouts to fossil fuel industries, why they can't take that money, divest in fossil fuels, divest in from corporate bailouts, and invest it in people. That's all my bill proposes to do. It's time that everybody in this place we call Canada can live with dignity and human rights.
Thank you for that, Leah. So, Senator Pate, so we actually wanted to follow up with that. First of all, we're so delighted to have you join us. And we would like to ask you about your bill S-233. I guess the S is for Senate, is that correct?
Yes, that's
okay,
right.
Okay. Unconditional basic income is called. So how do your bill and Leah's intersect, and how do you come to work together on these?
Right. Well, they're exactly the same bill. And I'm very pleased to join you from the shores of the Kitchissippi tonight, the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. Basically, one of the entire reasons that I even contemplated a Senate appointment when folks first approached me about the possibility of allowing my name to stand was guaranteed livable income, believe it or not, was one of the issues that I wanted to start working on. When I first came here, people told me that I would sound like I was a bit way out there. Some would say I already did before that, if I started in the Senate with that. And so I started talking to folks about it. And the long and the short was when I turned 60, I was actually appointed on my birthday. And when I turned 60, 3 years later, I thought, okay, if I'm not going to do it now, I'm never going to do it. So launched an inquiry into, which many of you will know is basically throw it out there. I'm interested in this issue. Anybody else interested in discussing the idea of a guaranteed livable income? And 3 weeks later, the pandemic hits, and suddenly it looks like I don't look as way out there anymore to some people. It looks like this could be doable. And of course, as the government rolled out CERB. And so Leah and I have known each other for a while. We met before Leah was an MP, and incredible advocacy and work that she has done. And we came together on this. And when Leah was working on the bill, we thought, well, why not? Oftentimes you're trying to find someone to carry the bill in the other chamber when you're introducing something. We thought, why not introduce them together? So we introduced the same bill. As you've already indicated, one's C-223 and mine is S-233, which just means it does designate where it is. And it's the same bill. We're trying to get them implemented. It's interesting that the push against it seems to be from folks who either don't fully understand what we're trying to do, or there's some kind of just moralistic anti-poor people linking to myths and stereotypes about poor people, and no basis in reality for what we're actually already spending. If you're just look at economics, but the social costs as well as the economics of what we're wasting in terms of human potential and finances when we talk about, no question about just pumping more people into the prison system. No question about all the people on the street. No question about, relegating people to the system that actually keeps you in poverty. Social assistance schemes inadequate for everybody, and they punish you if you try and work and if you try and get ahead. So that's been for me. It was I thought, oh, if people just don't know. I was clearly mistaken, and people like Sheila and others who have been doing incredible work for many years have been challenging these myths and preconceptions much longer than I have. So we're looking forward to moving ahead and hopefully getting these things incorporated.
Well, thank you very much, Kim, and it's great to have you on Off the Hill today. And we are gonna get to some of the sort of obstacles and issues around a guaranteed income. But before we do that, before I bring in Sheila, it would be, I think, helpful for people to know in terms of the House of Commons versus the Senate. You've both been very clear that you have the same bill, you're working together. Any idea of which chamber it's going to come up first, or is that still an unknown?
Well, I think it's coming up in the Senate, and the fact that we're getting so much resistance tells me that some people think it's gaining traction in the Senate. I don't know what you think, Leah. I think there's lots of people supportive in both chambers.
Well, I think, certainly the support, if you look at polls nationally on a guaranteed livable basic income, it does have a lot of support. I think it's fallen prey to some of the conspiracy theories. Like, for example, you have to have a vaccine in order to get a guaranteed livable basic income. That was a whole campaign. So I think it's fallen prey to that ultra right-wing conspiracy theory rhetoric. I figure if it's getting that much attention, then it's probably a good sign that it's building momentum and that there might be some hope. I know that my motion certainly in the last parliament had a cross-section of support from unions to disability groups, women's organizations fighting against violence for women and diverse gendered individuals. Time and time again, guaranteed livable basic income. There's no reason why any child in this country should live in poverty. One of the reasons why both Kim and I's bill have proposed a guaranteed livable basic income for anybody over the age of 18, not requiring citizenship, refugee claimants, permanent residents, students, seniors. And we know from examples from countries that have actually implemented, and even in Manitoba in the Dauphin study, that it had nothing but benefits, more expensive in the beginning, cost savings, healthcare, mental health, crime rates went down. Why? Because investing in people is good.
Thanks, Leah. And I'm going to bring in Sheila now. And, it's one thing to have a legislative initiative. In fact, it's very important to have a legislative initiative. And we've got Leah's bill in the House of Commons. We've got Kim's bill in the Senate. So it's fantastic. But building a movement, a base for that guaranteed basic livable income is quite another matter. So Sheila, we're delighted to have you on Off the Hill panel today because you're the chairperson of the Basic Income Canada Network, which kind of says it all. But please tell us about the work of the network and how you're building a constituency, a movement, a network to actually advance these legislative initiatives.
Thanks, Libby, so much. And it's so great to be with Leah and Kim again. There really is so much to unpack here. And I agree with Kim that this, and Leah, that this real pushback lately, I think is ironically a sign of progress, that there's something really happening there. So when BICN started out, it was like howling in the wilderness kind of thing. This was around 2006 or so, when a group of people around the Hill, some on the Hill, some off the Hill in advocacy organizations, some academics. Long story short, we in 2008 decided to become an affiliate of an international basic income network that's just grown stronger and stronger. But this was a small group of people. We were at one point called just a bunch of grassroots people. We were called just a bunch of academics. And so, it started out very small, even though we've been through several rounds of this in Canada. So we still are the only formally registered nonpartisan nonprofit organization. So we're a network with a capital N with a board, and we're an organization, and we do that. We have, I mean, our role is to work with civil society, everybody out there, to support people like him and Leah and everything that's being done on the Hill. We, in terms of our organization, we've developed a real reputation for, you know, credible information. We've created spaces to bring people together, to talk about these issues, to talk about some of our differences, and we've been a catalyst. So really fast forward from 2008. So this is through the Ontario pilot, through the pandemic, through CERB, through all of those things. We're at a point now where we are certainly not alone. The small N network is huge. We ourselves have tens of thousands of people in our supporter base, but there are other national, regional, provincial, territorial, local organizations across the country, and increasingly allies from other movements. Kim mentioned, you know, the fact that the report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls included a call, and, you know, all sorts of things. So we now, all of these organizations are coming together in a national forum, and our recent foray is to build a really unified political campaign. And you can Google this, just basicincomenow.ca. And we're becoming much more politically active. We've done a lot of philosophical and policy work, and I want to very quickly touch on that. Our most recent thing in ally building, however, is a project with environmental advocates that show that both income insecurity and climate are the two major crises of our day, and they have to be solved together. But the final point I wanted to make was, right before the pandemic hit, we released a groundbreaking look at how you can actually model a basic income. So this publication with Chandra Pasma and I as co-authors, but with an A-list team of who's who in social policy and modeling in Canada, developed this basic income, some policy options for Canada. So it showed there are options. They're real, you can do them, it's affordable, it's feasible. Not all of them are politically as sellable as others. So we, following CERB, which approximated the same amount that we modeled, interestingly enough. So they kind of copycatted us on that, but it established a good level. So this modeling really is top of the line. And even some of our staunchest critics acknowledge that this work is really amazing. 3 options. Out of those, we picked one to really push, and that's the kind of thing that Leah was talking about. It's 18 to 64-year-olds for us. Additional provision for, I don't want to get too policy wonky, but it's really filling in the gap for people who are left out based on successful programs that we already have.
Thank you, Sheila. Actually, we're going to allow you to get more policy wonky with the next question, because we want to get into more about what exactly is a guaranteed livable basic income, because later on we're going to talk about some of the different opinions. We want to understand, get an idea, okay, what do people have different opinions about, right? So it's guaranteed livable basic income. Also guaranteed, that's pretty clear. Income, pretty clear. Livable and basic, what can we, and this is a question for everybody. Can you tell us more about what it is? Like what's the amount, for example? I'm sure a lot of people are like, all right, how much would I get in my pocket, right? But I don't know. Anyone can jump in.
Okay, I think the first thing we need to clarify is that it's not going to benefit billionaires in anybody's model, even people who are calling for, theoretically, a fully universal model. The tax system comes into play, and the billionaires are not going to walk away with extra money. It does not work that way. So I think what most of the movement across the country is proposing is what we call like the guarantee model. So not everybody gets a check, not everybody gets the same amount. It would work like child benefits do. It's based on the amount of other income you have. The more you need help, you get it. And then as your income increases and you become more secure, then the benefits level off. I think for us, it really is that dual thing. And I think a lot of people kind of forget that. It's about income, but it's also about security. And a lot of the programs that we've got cut you off at the knees as soon as you start doing well, and then you fall back and start all over again. Not helpful. So I'll let others weigh in. The amount that we modeled for all of our options, like I said, if you adjust for inflation, by the time CERB rolled around, it would be about $2,000 a month, like that. And, you know, most social assistance across the country is like just desperately
low.
Ridiculous. Just ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Kim. You go first.
No, you go ahead. No,
well,
you go ahead.
And it's an unconditional cash payment that is provided, like social assistance. But then going back, it's not livable. And, you know, people always talk about what are the costs. I think we need to start talking about the high costs of poverty. We know there's a direct link between mental health and poverty. We know there's a direct correlation between rates of violence and poverty. And you know what Kim and I are proposing in our legislation is not to gut the social safety net. What our bills are saying is that our social safety net is not cutting it anymore. And we need income guarantees, unconditional income guarantees that people can rely on in addition to current and future government programs and supports, like, for example, dental care, like, for example, affordable, accessible housing with rent geared to income. And we know, I mean, it's been well studied, certainly here in Manitoba, there was the Ontario study, that when you provide people with what they need, when you ensure that people can live in dignity, it has cost savings in the long run. Like, let's get real. We know there's a direct correlation between poverty and rates of crime. I'm saying is what we are saying in terms of our bills is instead of spending over $200,000 a year keeping one woman in a federal penitentiary, why don't you take that money and invest it in people so that they have what they need to not just survive, but to thrive and have real choices in their life and not be beholden to abusive employers or not be beholden to have to stay in violent relationships that we know cost lives. So I think we need to start changing the narrative around guaranteed income and really focus on what the real problem is. And I would say it's the ultra rich, it's the billionaires. If you want to talk about lazy, it's the ultra rich living on their yacht, drinking cocktails. The hardest job that you can have is being poor. Where am I going to stay tonight? What am I going to eat? How am I going to stay warm? That's a full-time 24-hour job. That is the hardest job. I'm saying we have the resources and we need to ensure that everybody in this country lives in dignity.
Mm-hmm. So can I just to clarify, Leah, so my understanding then that you guys are saying enhance the existing social safety net program, so increase those and then add another extra payment?
Yeah, it's just saying we have income guarantees. We need to make them livable and spread those income guarantees and spread out income guarantees to make sure that those who are falling through the cracks no longer fall through the cracks. We already have income guarantees. This is not a new concept, which is why I don't understand when people push against it. Nobody would ever say, I want you to take away your grandmother's GIS check, right? But we need to make it livable and we need to spread it out.
Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
I was going to say, and it's possible it could replace social assistance, but not social programs ultimately. And places like PEI are already asking for income, for the federal government to come to the table. They've already voted. All party committee, including Conservatives to Greens, have voted in favor of this. And so there's already a model. And I think it's important to point out, as Leah did and as Sheila did, that it's not just the social assistance rates are inadequate. I would argue they're criminally low. People intentionally put those in. And, we didn't criminalize the politicians who intentionally created a more intense abject poverty for folks and put them in a position where it's no wonder that over 80% of the women currently incarcerated are there for poverty-related offenses. Now, can you get charged for just being poor? No, but there's all kinds of things you do to navigate and negotiate and live when you're poor that can result in you being criminalized. Everything from even getting groceries that you don't declare, and people giving you gifts that aren't declared. So we're talking about an approach that would provide a leg up and out of poverty and incentivize, if people want to work, incentivizes them. Right now, there's the disincentive to work, the disincentive to volunteer, the disincentive to be able to do lots of things that people want to do is actually our social assistance our social assistance programs across the country. Because if you start to make, it's the only place where debt is considered income. Imagine if the middle class and certainly the rich, every time they borrowed money to buy stocks or houses or cars or whatever, that got counted as income and taxed accordingly. Well, poor people, if they borrow money, it gets counted as income, clawed back from their assistance checks, and then it's worse yet, they don't get a benefit once it pays back. The first time I learned about that was when Kim Rogers was dealing with being charged with welfare fraud here in Ontario. She died in the midst of her court case. She was going, I think it would have been successful, because what it revealed to us was, the government went to great lengths to hide the fact that they knew very well they were putting people in harm's way and risking their lives. And, I have never seen so many lawyers come out to defend those actions in that inquest into her death. And yet we never really got to the bottom of the difference in policies around, let's think of the different language. Welfare fraud, income tax evasion, OHIP avoidance, like all of the ways that professionals get described as not doing something wrong or maybe making a little mistake, but people who are poor get described as fraudulent and criminal. Sorry, I get a little worked up about it.
Great points, Kim. I'm actually going to move on to the next question, but you can jump back in a second, Sheila. First of all, you've all done a great job of explaining how a guaranteed livable basic income would work. And I think it's just so important for us all to understand that the framework is actually already there. It's just making it consistent, guaranteed, and making it unconditional. So that great explanations. So all of you have alluded to some of the sort of obstacles to a guaranteed livable basic income. So I'm going to just switch over to Karl now, kind of put you on the spot, Karl, because I think it would be interesting to just have a little bit of discussion about what are the obstacles to achieving a guaranteed livable basic income. Are those obstacles, is it more political? Is it economic? Is it even legal? Or maybe it's all of the above. But Karl, you always have a very good sort of bird's eye view of what's going on the Hill and policy development and so on. So why don't you start us off on just responding to that question about what you see as some of the obstacles are and how do we get around them?
Okay, I'm learning about that. That's called the mute button, you see, showing my age now. All right. I would say that it's true that though there is a building momentum, the momentum I think is building because of the experience of the pandemic and the experience of the CERB, which is really, the CERB became essentially partly what unemployment insurance always should have been, and partly a kind of guaranteed livable income. We knew suddenly overnight the government was just putting money in people's pockets, so they're going through an enormous, huge process of putting them through the ringer because they had no. Well, I mean, the Americans chose not to do that. The Americans had a very different approach, but our approach worked better and was more effective. And I think that has helped build. The people involved in this issue can tell me I'm wrong, but I think that has helped build momentum toward a more permanent sort of system. But what we face here is. Many people in Parliament, even people who you consider to be progressive, are going to right away now get up. I mean, people are so short-sighted. we lived through the pandemic and we're still in the pandemic, and yet now our focus is on so-called shortage of labor, need for more workers, and inflation. I mean, we even have, the leader of the Bloc Québécois, who likes to call himself Yves-François Blanchet, a social democrat, he stands up and starts ranting about how being too generous with people, the pandemic supports, he complained in the last election campaign, were too generous for people, with meaning that you couldn't find workers because they didn't want to work because they were getting paid to stay home. I mean, it is nonsense and not true on the evidence, because if you have a system that's supple and flexible that says that you can work and benefit from working, you can work and benefit not just from the financial benefit of working, but from the social and personal and self-esteem benefit of working, and then not be paid and not be penalized financially, but you can actually get ahead financially, people will actually work, so I mean, there's many examples that I'm not going to get into an argument, but if you were just asking about the obstacles, there's a huge obstacle, because there's a community there of people who are now shifting the conversation away from, look what the pandemic taught us. We can create greater equality. We can create a program overnight, virtually, in a weekend, a few civil servants on the back of an envelope that actually supports people. Now we're saying, oh my God, what are we in here? We have no workers. Small businesses can't function because nobody wants to work. That's a new psychology. The other issue is that this is a federal country, as we all know. The last time we had a major social policy, federal, provincial reworking, Libby, you were in Parliament. It was the what they used to call the SUFA, the Social Union Framework Agreement, at the time of the Chrétien government, where they were essentially trying to cut the federal government was trying to cut its contributions under the old Canada Assistance Plan and under the established programs contributions that they used to make, and they wanted to buy off the provinces in a way, and succeeded by saying, we're rewriting all the rules, we're giving you more flexibility, we're giving you more independence and control, and we're changing things around. But the last time we got into this whole enterprise, it was really an exercise in austerity and an exercise in moving the federal government away from an active role in anything. The federal government discovered that Canadians, even Canadians who agreed with it in general, were horrified at the thought that the federal government was moving too far away from supporting healthcare. So they kind of backed down on that aspect, but not on the rest. So what you need now, I mean, whatever you're going to do here, it is going to have to happen as the childcare agreements that we've just seen happened, within the context of a federal provincial negotiation. And I think it has to happen also within the context of a larger vision. Putting money in poor people's pockets is far from adequate. I just want to give you an example. I mean, in the city of Ottawa, the richest people who know Ottawa, in the district called Rockcliffe, where the embassy houses and where the Governor General's residence is. Well, a very short drive from they have beautiful public services. Actually, they have the best public services. If you consider a park a public service, the most beautiful parks in the greenest area, the cleanest air to breathe in the whole city. You go a couple of kilometers west from them, and you're on a street called King Edward, which people in Ottawa would know, which is actually still a residential street, but it's a highway. It's a choking with pollution highway with no green space. There's not a tree on the place. And that's where the poor people get to live. So the problem is not just putting money in those people's pockets, but in creating community for everybody, creating community, creating real hope and a real meaningful life and community for people who live in King Edward as well as people who live in Rockcliffe.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Karl, for that sort of overview, because for sure there are political obstacles and questions about how this will come about. But I think the important thing is we can see that it has been done before with other agreements, and so it can be done again. So anybody else like to weigh in on just what kinds of obstacles that you're facing? Maybe Sheila, would you like to give that a go? What are you facing now in the network? You said that you're growing a lot, but are you also facing opposition?
I think, as Kim mentioned earlier, I think part of the opposition is just confusion about what we really mean by what we're asking for. Excuse me. A lot of that confusion is, I think, sown by people who don't want a basic income. They create straw men all the time by proposing a basic income that has nothing to do with what we want and then knocking it down. The larger issues, I mean, I think Leah talked about this earlier on. There's a colonialist mentality. There's a racist slave history mentality. There is a poor bashing mentality amongst people. And with increasing polarization in our neoliberal society, you've got a class of people making decisions who have zero understanding of what life is like for most people. And to me, that's huge. I don't know how you turn that around, but the rank and file of political parties, even lots of people in the Conservative Party, are supportive of a basic income. A lot of people, young people, it's just an automatic reflex that it immediately makes sense. It's intuitive. So I think we have a bit of a leadership crisis here that needs to be solved, because all of this is just going to keep getting worse. Every day I hear on the radio and TV, oh, we have a food security problem here. We have a gun violence problem here. And they all say the underlying problem is poverty and inequality. Well, this is how you fix it.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to jump in before we move on to the next question?
Well, I just want to talk about, I mean, there's, like Sheila mentioned, there's so much stigma around being poor. And I have to say, as somebody who taught at a university for many years, I spent my career in academia, it's easy to study these issues from an ivory tower and provide all sorts of economic theories about, incremental justice, alleviating poverty through incremental measures. But it's another thing when you're actually living that poverty on the ground. And the reality of living that poverty on the ground, certainly in my riding, is people freezing to death in bus shacks every year, people with complex mental health and trauma who fall outside the neoliberal expectations of get a job, work 5 days a week, living on the streets, living without dignity. It looks like, thousands of Indigenous women and girls and diverse gendered people going murdered and missing. It looks like refugee families coming into my riding and living in overcrowded housing conditions without even qualifying for a Canada child tax benefit because they don't have proper immigration status, something that's in the courts right now. Poverty is one of the most, from my perspective, vile human rights violations that is solvable. We need to divest, for example, the $2.6 billion that was given to fossil fuel industries, the $50 million that was given to MasterCard, the $12 million for fridges that was given to Loblaws, nobody batting an eye, nobody doing massive campaigns talking about why didn't they work for that $2.6 billion. No campaigns. We need to stop poor bashing. We need to ensure people have what they need. We need to stop making human rights a partisan political issue, and we need to save lives.
Thanks, Leah. I'm going to just quickly switch back to Karl, because Karl, I just kind of want to bring you in on how this issue is seen from what you've experienced from a media point of view. I mean, I think everything that Leah and Kim and Sheila have said is absolutely correct in terms of violence, poverty, colonialism, racism, and yet we don't talk a lot about solutions in the media. Do you think that this issue of a guaranteed livable basic income, is it even on the radar of the media, Karl, that you've been able to see, like from the perspective of looking at the Hill?
I've been always historically a few journalists in mainstream media who took an interest in social policy and policy, maybe in policy in general. There seem to be fewer than there used to be in the past. And a sad truth about about the way our political media is organized. It's all organized about scoops and scandals and polls and competition and political horse race. And I think I do know, in the years ago when I produced the CBC program, The House, we used to have people from organizations like the Caledon Institute on constantly talking about social policy and changes in social policy, because that was very much on the government's agenda. I mean, my own philosophy as a producer was I wouldn't bring lobbyists on representing different political parties to yammer away and just give canned lines in favor of their own party. I'd bring people who knew what they're talking about. And if you're going to bring political people in, bring people with skin in the game. People who are actually running for parliament or were members of parliament. But now if you watch these programs or listen to these programs, mostly watch them, it's all it's all a little bit like a Monty Python-esque argument. There's a sketch where they have an argument and all it is contradiction. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. You're right, you're wrong. And it's just lacking in any context or content. So I mean that's a pessimistic view of the media, but it doesn't mean that you can't grab the attention and imagination of some journalists and some TV producers and bloggers and various other people who are in the media and get them excited about an idea and a possibility. I think the people have to lead the journalists, not the other way around in this case. And if the people really, if there are enough people who are promoting and pushing and advocating for something, there will be some journalists who pay attention.
Okay, thanks, Karl. And before we go to the audience questions, which Robin's going to field, just a quick go around to all of you. So what can people do to get involved? If people are interested in this issue, they want to help out with these two bills, if they want to get involved in network, what can people do specifically?
Well, maybe I'll start by just saying, I think let your MPs, senators know that you support these bills and want to see them support them. Call them up and say, we want to see this in place. And, I'm also, I've been reaching out to people I never thought I'd be in coalition with. Some of the guys who came from business who are in the Senate have been some of the ones saying, look, people are saying you can't pay for it. If you solve this issue on tax reform, if you solve this issue, we could solve it. And, some of them, for instance, when I was railing on about the fact that the issue that Leah just raised, that competition law did not cover it covered price fixing, but not wage fixing. How could that be? And they're saying, well, this is areas that we're trying to work on. So I'm thinking like, okay, we can. So I think, talking about some of those areas where the people are getting away with making, I was going to say something, a swear, but I won't do that. So a ton of money at our expense and at the expense of all the people who have the least. And so insist that we do the tax reform. This can be paid for, as Sheila and others have argued so clearly. This can be paid for by other measures that would actually create a more equitable situation, which is a big piece of what drives, if I don't want to speak for you, Leah, but I think it's what drives both of us, because it's where we've come from. It's the people we know, the people who, when they're not supported, end up in the jails, on the street, dead or disappeared.
Hey, any other quick comment before we go to some of the questions that have come in?
I'll repeat, go to basicincomenow.ca. We are very heavily involved now. We started out with the federal election. We're heavily involved in Ontario now. Other provinces are watching to see what happens, but there's a list of things that you can do. We have pledge campaigns so that if people pledge to support a basic income, if they get elected, we hold their feet to the fire and make sure they do it. As Leah said, like writing to MPs, writing to senators, talking to your friends and relatives. I've been actually stunned by people who I thought in my own family would be rather staunchly opposed, and they were all for it. So, and I think the same advice is coming from Lead Now and other organizations. Lead Now's got huge following, and they are all saying that climate action and basic income are the two major issues of the day. And they too recommend talking to people. Talk to people you think are the enemy, and try to find some common ground, like even the ones who are creating a lot of trouble. And we ran into them this weekend. So the last thing is get to the streets. We did that in Toronto. On Saturday, we got a little bit of CBC coverage. Pressure the media in any way you can to cover this more. Yeah, just get active.
Can I just
Yep.
can I just intercede? Somebody made a comment. He couldn't find basicincome.ca. It's basicincomecanadaa.org, actually. Is that the Basic Income Canada network? Am I in the right place now?
Yeah, basicincomecanadaa.org is our organization. The political campaign is basicincomenow.ca.
Okay.
And it's an amalgamation of all of the organizations across the country.
Okay, so to the person who was not able to find it, it's Basic Income Now, not .ca, not just Basic Income. So it's basicincomenow.ca.
And
or
that'll
what we just said earlier.
Organizations too. Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Underneath.
These websites can be tricky to find.
All right. Great discussion as always. Yes, we have lots of audience interaction in the chat and questions. So you folks have spoken a bit about some of the critiques of basic income. More from the right. We've alluded to some on the left, but we have one right here coming in the questions from none other than Rabble's founder, Judy Rebeck, who says that Arlene Yelnitsin, who is one of the most progressive economists in the country, argues that a guaranteed annual basic income is not realistic or affordable. How do you respond to this? So I guess Leah, Sheila, and Kim.
Oh, I want to respond to that.
Go ahead, Leah. Go ahead, Leah.
You know, when OAS came into place, everybody said the sky was going to fall. You know, Medicare is the same thing. The sky is going to fall. When did any sort of robust social program in this country cause a natural disaster? It improved lives. It improved, especially for seniors, for example, it allowed seniors to finally be able to live in dignity. Many seniors who are women that don't benefit from a pension actually might have an opportunity, who've worked their whole lives, to have an opportunity to live in dignity. We have to stop making excuses about why we don't look after people. And we need to focus our attention on divesting from fossil fuels, changing, as Kim and Sheila have spoken about, adjusting our tax systems to make sure that the wealthy are paying their fair share. We need to take that money and invest in people. While Jeff Bezos gets to fly to the moon in a rocket ship, maybe that should be the focus on what is not working and making sure that people have what they need to not just survive, but to thrive. There is no excuse. And when you're not in that position, it's really easy to find excuses about why it's not working. But we need to stop making excuses and give people what they need to thrive.
Kim, did you want to jump in?
Let Sheila, because I know she's
okay.
But yeah.
So I have a lot of respect for Arlene. I think the economist in her has taken over too much. The weight of evidence is not with her. It's just not. She's arguing for, I don't want to get too much into what she's proposing. I don't want to do that, but she's talking about more services instead of more income. And there's no demonstrable proof that any of that is going to work. Quick example, when child benefits were brought in, there was an income part, there was a services part. The provinces were supposed to use the money they gained to bring in more services for children. When they did several evaluations of this new national child benefit framework back in the 90s and early 2000s, the income part proved it worked. The services part, they couldn't even evaluate. So those services are doing great things and we need them. Like kids have special needs. There are services for seniors if you need them, but you still need the money. Nothing can replace that.
Mm-hmm. Even with the childcare initiative that's been brought in, there aren't going to be sufficient subsidized spots you can guarantee. And if you don't have money, $10 a day is still unachievable. If you're I think it fundamentally is a block that people have about providing money to folks, even though nobody ever questions, so many other areas where people get money, whether it's, when rich give money to their kids or whatever. It's a block about poor people is all that I can see. And I guess if you've never experienced that, you presume that everybody else who doesn't have money is just out to get yours, but so I hear it from a number, and when I was first starting doing this, I heard it from a number of economists, and then I went and looked, and every argument they made didn't hold up. And then sometimes they'll end up saying to you, well, morally, I agree with you. Well, that's not helping. You may morally agree, but you actually have to look at a more progressive approach. And maybe those old myths and stereotypes about poor people, you should really question how you got to that place and where you've seen them borne out. And Will Robertson, who's a young up and coming, I'm not sure if he's an economist, but he did some research. He was hired by one of my colleagues to look at, for instance, CERB. One of the theories was that all these people stayed home and didn't work. And when I started talking to the people who actually believed that, most of them were very privileged people who had their own kids who were eligible for CERB because they were students and stayed home. And I was like, I'm sorry, talk to a few poor people who got it. They weren't just sitting around on their butts, doing nothing. They were actually doing all kinds of other things, trying to make ends meet. And CERB was great for them for a period of time, but there's a whole bunch of people that then got turfed off benefits because of the punitive, mean-spirited attitude towards poor people. So I agree with Sheila and with Leah. I think it's, the problem is that it gains traction because it's people who are seen as credible, who identify as feminists, who maybe have never actually worked in the trenches with the people who are most in need. Let's remember that the Status of Women Committee that proposed childcare also proposed a guaranteed livable income. We've got childcare now. When are we going to get the guaranteed livable income?
Okay. No, thank you, Senator. Hey, this has been
just call me Kim, please.
Oh, sorry. We're getting near the end, but there's another question here from the audience. Pretty practical and related. You've mentioned the PEI model. So Barry Morris is asking if the PEI project, pilot project, is a helpful way to get wider approval for a federal policy or a mere diversion.
Well, I think that's an important question. Many of us see it as a way to get it started in much the way Medicare started in Saskatchewan. Once it's started to roll out, everybody wanted in, and no government was game to eliminate it. Now we've had all kinds of evisceration of both healthcare as well as social and education programs, but nobody's been game to actually eliminate them. And I think that's where the bill that Leah and I have introduced, the bills that we've introduced, really are about saying, let's bring all these folks to the table and talk, and let's demonstrate this in PEI. Newfoundland now is interested. I was speaking to the Premier of Newfoundland, and it was deemed the #1 determinant of health was poverty. And so they want to look at doing something as well, and whether they can do it incrementally. Personally, I'd love to see it right across the board, but I am prepared to live with my own hypocrisy of saying, if it's got to be incremental to get it done, let's get it done.
If I can add to that, Robin, just very quickly, I think the way we see, and I think most of the people in PEI as well who are working on this, really do see this as a demonstration of how to do it. It's not, gee, I wonder if this is a good idea or not. It's, let's figure out how to really roll this out. And what we're trying to get Ontario politicians to look at now is, I wonder how it would look if it rolled out in Ontario. Let's figure that out. And then as the bills bring people together, then we figure out how to make it work across the country. We're not sitting around waiting to find out whether it works or not. We're into the mechanics of really doing it now.
Okay, thanks, Sheila. Another question, this one will go to you, Leah, from Maria Sylvester. She says, Leah has mentioned the importance of addressing colonialism and Indigenous poverty. how would this interact with and uphold self-determination and self-governance?
Well, I mean, I think we just need to look at Call for Justice 4.5 of the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous women and girls that calls directly to implement a guaranteed livable basic income. If we want to address colonialism, let's go to the root of it. You know, it's the wrongful and violent dispossession of lands from Indigenous people that left many of us homeless on our own lands, living in poverty. This is coming directly from Indigenous women who are saying this is one of the ways to address the historical aftermath of violent colonialism that continues to be perpetrated against Indigenous women and girls and diverse gendered individuals. Nobody's telling anybody how to spend the money. You know, and that's the difference between what Kim and I are offering. Instead of having a punitive system where your bank account's monitored, where if you decide to work one day and earn $10, that's deducted from your pay, that you have the autonomy to make decisions about your own life. You can spend that money how you choose, and you're not penalized for being poor. You know, so I mean, I think it's certainly we saw in the TRC, we saw a correlation between, you know, current circumstances and poverty. Aboriginal Justice Inquiry a million years ago, you know, pointed to that. Now we have the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous women and girls that has come out, and it's time to act on those. It's time to act on those calls to justice, listen and implement.
Well, thank you. So that is all the time we have for questions today. And thanks to our audience members for their interventions and great questions. As usual, we didn't get to a lot of them. They're great. Thank you so much to all our panelists, Kim, Senator Pate, Leah Gazan, Sheila Regehr, Karl Nerenberg, and to my host, Libby Davies. Our next panel will take place in June, so please stay tuned for updates on that event and be sure to sign up for Rabble's newsletter at rabble.ca/alerts to make sure you get the invitation. And finally, thank you to Rabble for creating a space to host these important discussions. We encourage you to help Rabble out by becoming a monthly donor at rabble.ca/donate. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you in June.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Yeah, take good care. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Very nice
Great
to meet
discussion.
those that didn't meet
Thank
before.
you.
Yes, great discussion.
Thank you.